Sorry. So we were saying. My question was how much in-depth personal detail do you have to get with an athlete that you're working with to really come up with a periodization? Do you have to know about diet, sleeping habits, things like this?
Where I can, yeah, at the deepest I can, but I'm not the only professional who takes care about these details. Controlling all of this or taking into consideration all of this by myself would be really too much for one person only.
Sure.
Therefore, that's why the staff has lifestyle advisors, psychologists, and role models inside our ranks.
Right.
But yeah, those are information that we exchange consistently in order to keep aware and to keep close observation of the guys into the Olympic preparation.
How badly has this COVID situation, disrupted your current plan of periodization, and what adjustments have you made for that?
Well, it has caused a plane interruption, so everything went frozen. So the disruption is not being massive because there is not being an event. The event is not being held. So the Olympic Games have been postponed. With the Olympic Games in place, the disruption would have been significant. A cycle of 7 months would have gone down, would have gone binned. So in 3 months, we would have found ourselves to rebuild the event. That's one of the reasons why all the national governing bodies stood together in asking for the postponement of the games.
Is it now just postponed 1 year now?
1 year, yeah. It would be the same period. As far as we know, at this moment in time, it is said to be in the same time scale, in the same period it was originally planned for 2020.
Right, okay. And obviously there are unexpected things that happen, injury or different circumstances. I guess you just have to assess how the extent of the injury or the change in circumstance and then adapt your periodization model around that. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. So when it comes to be an injury in place, when we cannot expect it or where we cannot predict it and working around it, effectively it comes to be always a thing of tweaking around loads, tweaking around training times, when an athlete can keep training. Where an athlete must interrupt training, there are the other services that activates, and we coordinate each other in order to maintain what we can.
Now, in archery, when does the season begin and when is kind of the peak, and when does it end normally?
That depends by many factors. That depends by the calendar mostly. Like all periodized plans, when it comes to competitive sport, they are mostly done by the time scale, by the macro period. That's what we call the time scale, basically, how many months these athletes are expected to be engaged with, and the frequency of the events,
right,
and how many priority events you've got in there. So in our case, as example, we had a season of pretty much focusing on the Olympic Games because the Olympic qualifier was already done timely and well done last year. But there were also 1 or 2 World Cups which were at this point raising in priority because they were reliable tests, pre-Olympic tests. So our job would have been to be engaged from September of this year to end of August, beginning of August will be the end of the Olympics, and assigned as priority, 2 or 3 competitive events assigned as priority. So overall, pretty much 10 months, with alternating 3 to 5 months of loading and alternated deloads and reloads to secure the resilience until the Olympics.
Yeah. Now, let's say, okay, someone is aiming to kind of peak at an outdoor competition in summer, but in the build up to that, there are other mini competitions. So it's not just that one main competition that they are preparing for. There's a number of qualifying rounds or things like that. Do they also have their own periodization kind of plan, or is that included in the whole annual plan for that year?
It must be included in the whole annual plan. So I must be aware, we must be aware usually of the whole calendar, individual calendar of competition athlete, because an athlete must make the choices, the painful choices at times, to pass through one or two competitions under load. So being aware that his fitness and his performance potential won't be 100%, as it is in professional sports, wherever. And doing the choice of other competitions, test events, where he will or she will simulate in a 100% simulated manner. So really pretending that we are leading towards the Olympic event, as example, to see what peak of performance we have recorded, we can record into the period, and to evaluate the period of training that we've done up to the point.
Yeah. You talked about, let's say someone qualified for the Olympics, but, that was last year. But during the year, they have a change of circumstance, injury, or their performance is just not where it should be. If they are unable to continue for whatever reason, is there still a chance for someone else to come in and take their place, or not? Or the time is not enough?
Well, that depends. This is more a question effectively to be addressed to the performance director, because there are legal criteria to select the athletes.
Yeah.
So it's not always possible to call up a replacement by the PD and by the technical panel, leaving the choice of calling a sudden replacement in case of emergency. Effectively, that can be done. But like in all sports, if you are running up late for the race, and when you are about to call a last-minute replacement, if that replacement is an Olympic reserve, effectively you have been preparing that athlete to the most similar rationale as with the Olympic athletes. Whether, if in the case that the athlete is not part of an Olympic program, which I don't see that happening anyway at the days of today, in that case you will have to deal with what you have.
Yeah. Just going back to your role at ArcheryGB, what other sports have you been involved with in terms of your strength and conditioning and physio, things like that, and your own sport personally? What is your main sport yourself?
This is an interesting question, because as an athlete, I've been practicing in many sports. Yeah, as an athlete, I've been athlete competing in volleyball. I've been athlete competing very young in volleyball, to be fair. I've been athlete competing up to semi-pro in football. I've been competing in racing. There's been quite a wide array of experiences.
Is this back in Italy or other countries you've been to?
Back in Italy. Yeah. I've been living in Italy, and I've been part of my Olympic squad until 2014, when I left the camp.
How long were you with that Olympic squad for then?
I stepped into the Olympic squad in Italy in season 2009-2010, as far as I remember. Might be inaccurate though. So as far as I remember, 5 seasons. Yeah, 4 or 5 seasons.
Right. Okay. And you were doing the same work
as a professional
there as you were doing here?
No, there I was an athlete.
Oh, actual athlete. Okay, I've got it right. I see.
At the time I was an athlete. At the time I was in the Olympic squad as an athlete. So I started coaching at professional level quite recently, 2014 effectively. 2014, I've done a few consultancies in South Africa. Then I moved to Thailand as head coach of their team for the Olympic qualification for Rio.
Okay.
Then I relocated over here to UK. In other sports, as a professional, as SNC, I've done an internship in football with one of the sub clubs of the Juventus Football Club in Turin. That is where I was living and where I had a few colleagues working in there. I've done an internship, an integrated internship dealing with other sports, the Italian Olympic Committee School of Sports in Roma. Short collaborations, short consultancies with other 2 or 3 sports. It was volleyball, I remember, for a period of 4 to 6 months. Short cooperation with an athlete training in triathlon. Another couple of engagement in archery, but in other disciplines like horse shooting and hunting and field preparation, and swimming.
Okay, excellent. So quite a wide range of different sports. And so now you've been at ArcheryGB since 2014, 2015, is that right?
I have started working in ArcheryGB in August 2016.
Okay. So about four years now.
Yeah.
Moving on to archery technique. There's the very well-known Italian archer. I'm sure you probably know him personally. Back in the last Olympics, he had a very unorthodox method of shooting, and he won the final against the USA. I forget his name at the moment, but his approach was very, I guess unorthodox is the word. He would move his head a lot and move his hands, but I mean, he managed to get the 10 on the line. Do you remember this guy?
Are you referring to the individual final or to the team final?
No, the team. It was a team final.
Team final, it was a clean sweep as far as I remember. So it was Korea team against the United States of America. Can't remember exactly the final.
Yeah.
Who are you referring to?
I forget his name. I'll have to look it up. But I'm sure that the competition was it was against the States, because I remember Brady Ellison was on the other team, and it was a 3-on-3. This Italian archer, he had the last shot, I think it was, or the last round, and I think what stuck out is that his technique was again not the kind of textbook technique that we read in the books. I
think I know what you're talking about. Yes, I think you are referring not at the last Olympics, not at Rio de Janeiro, but at London. And effectively,
yes.
That is the Olympics of my teammates, because I was in the squad at the time, even if I wasn't in the Olympic team.
Right.
And the athlete you are mentioning is Michele Frangilli.
That's right.
Michele has been quite notorious across his whole career.
Right.
For the movement of his head and the way that he gets to anchor and he gets to his reference points. He's been a long history Olympian. Best Olympics that he's done, I believe, has been Atlanta. Then Atlanta, he's done Sydney, then he's done Athens 2004. He missed Beijing and he went back to London and he won London in the team with Marco and Mauro Nespoli. Everybody else.
Yeah, it was just interesting that his technique, like I said, was not the way that we're normally taught at archery clubs and maybe even on development squads, but he was still able to get to elite level with his technique and deliver on time, and he won that match. What does that say about people having their own twist in their technique? Is there always one particular way of doing something, or as long as it works for you and you can execute the shot well, then that is really sufficient?
There is always some unique way some consistent way that must be done the same in all sports. And I am going to explain my statement. There is always some common law, some general law that must be respected. The point is that many times what we see as the commanding law of one sport is not exactly what we imagine it to be. And explaining it applied to archery, it means that what we believe techniques that the books teach us, what objectively we should be looking at in identifying what is the law in archery is physics, and specifically the forces commanding the bow, therefore the forces transitioning to the arrow to fly to the target.
Mm-hmm.
If you think on all the possible strange movements shot that you can see today on the shooting line, Michael effectively is not the only one moving the head away from his aiming line, then coming back into it, or moving the bow arm away from the line of the goal, and then coming back at it from the sides. See Brady Ellison a couple of years ago. From up to low. See Hojiniek, Koreans. What do they do, though, consistent, as well as Michele does, is after one click, there is always a consistent delivery of this bow arm, of this bow ahead towards the target. And that tells us that the real commanding law of this bow is not just about how we open the bow, but it's on how we make it closing.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Based upon that is what did I want to ask? There are many. If we talk about the Koreans, for example, they have they're kind of high draw, so they lift high and they come down. Other countries will have a different approach. So it's not necessarily about how you get to that end position, but the key thing is getting there consistently and then executing.
Absolutely, yeah. So to avoid being misunderstood from my previous statement, you can say that effectively you can open the bow in multiple ways. Obviously, and this is an obvious statement that I wish to make, the easiest and the most linear of those techniques, it is also the easiest to be built around performance, to be conditioned by us professionals, but especially to be rebuilt in case of crisis. So it is the easiest to get to the top level of repetitions. Therefore, stating that anybody can open the bow as they want, or stating that individual tweaks or shooting as you feel that you should be shooting is correct is a wrong statement, I think. Athletes still needs direction on how to learn the most effective technique, at least on the basic grounds, as we stated in the seminars that we did. The end goals, as we said, as we showed them into the seminars, are always converging. And on top of that, on top of those end goals, all athletes individually, they will have naturally their own tweaks. And that depends by a million of factors, so we cannot address them all.
Right.
We cannot really expect that all athletes coming from our schools, from our clubs, will look all the same. They may have common features, but their genetics, their DNA, their natural movement literacy that they have, their background and the other sports they practice, they will always give them multiple diversifications that we won't be able to control.
Yeah, and the idea is that you're not trying to change them and make everyone a robot and the same each way. I mean, everyone is naturally different, but you're just trying to keep everyone in a similar channel so that they're doing the same thing. Is that kind of correct, or? At
least that they finish in the same way, let's say.
Yeah.
That they satisfy the laws of the bow, that they satisfy the dynamics of the bow, in the least possible stressful way for the tool.
Yeah.
So the lesser disturbances come to the bow, come to be transferred to the bow, and the highest threshold of performance we can achieve.
Okay. Have you, when you were an athlete, would you mainly recurve or did you shoot compound as well?
I was a recurve. I was Olympic recurve. I have shot compound for pretty much half a season, 6 months, just to play next to my recurve bow, and I liked it. I liked it. Very different. My intuition was at the time that it was very different from what I was doing with my recurve bow. Later on, studying sports science, studying strength and conditioning and analysis, I could highlight effectively what differences are very far away make them very far away from one another, and what other common grounds they have, and there are many.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to talk about. Many people think, okay, with a compound, it's much more like a machine. There's many more things that help the archer, so there's less personal skill involved in shooting a compound than a recurve. Is that something you would agree? And what are the commonalities between the two when you're shooting them?
Yeah, I cannot agree at all for who says that the compound is an easier game than the recurve bow. Absolutely not. That is a serious underestimation of what the compound task is. What these guys do is a task very different from us, because first of all, they have the aiming skill, which is a forced factor, is a main factor in their shot, while our aiming skill in the recurve bow, it is an aiming which is composed, we may say, to say it brutally, between balance, between body awareness, and position of the bow. The compound guys, they must keep and hold their sight pin on the spot, and they must control the farther axis, the bubble, having a vision of it in front of their eyes. That makes the job of the eye, from a neuroscience point of view, being critical and being a primary factor of performance, which makes it already a complete new world of difficulties for the game itself.
You're saying, sorry to interrupt, you're saying that their focus is more on the scope and the bubble, rather than...
I'm saying that they are forced to aim, and aiming is one of the most difficult tasks the human body can neurally achieve.
Yeah.
And they must aim, and without aiming, they won't achieve performance. So they do not have many tolerance to mistakes. The bow is not a machine at all. The bow is extremely sensitive to micro differences. And those micro differences, as opposed to the recurve bow, can be consciously, at least in front of your eyes, effectively, potentially under your control, which makes the job more complicated than my eyes, not easier.
Right.
And then there are the masses involved. First of all, the bow itself. The bow can be 3.8 kilos, can be 4 kilos. That depends by the individual setup, but yet it is quite a consistent mass, higher, most of the times higher mass than what the recurve bow is. It is also more compressed, which makes the resistance job, our job, the human body job in handling this resistance, handling this load, and coping with it, fairly different in respect to the recurve bow. And there is a huge difference in coordination because the recurve bow is linear and proportional. So the more I draw and the more I can oppose with my bow arm pushing it to keep the balance, to keep the tool steady. With the compound, we have an outstanding difficult task because we have a peak of load in opening, which, if not mastered, it causes a displacement in the overall body in one direction or in the other. Then a sudden drop. By the time we are in anchor, my string hand is almost at zero. It's barely at a few percentage points. Load on the top of the bow. So my bow arm basically there is doing the majority of the job. In other words, I am passing in the range of 6 seconds, 8 seconds from a task of peak of force in pulling, a task of peak of force in holding, and the task of coordinating while I am releasing to keep the bow stable and delivering the arrow. I do not see it easy at all.
Yeah, it's very much so, whereas with the recurve, it's a lot more of a gradual progression. With the compound, it's very much kind of, up and down, because like you said, you have the peak weight and then suddenly it drops away. And if you're not correctly engaging the back and holding properly, then the bow will kind of shoot itself.
Absolutely, yeah. It is about finding there is a complete different compromise between the interaction between the body and the bow, which makes it a sport much more complicated for an Olympic planner, as example, thinking of my job to plan towards. I've been writing down 3 preparation programs for compounds. One of them was an international level when I was head of Thailand. It was Deng Chai. He used to be a decent athlete for the standard that they had in Thailand. Obviously, Thailand had a standard fairly lower than the rest of the world. He was a 645 pounds. After 1 year of work and a serious work, more addressed to strength as opposed to the recurve bow. So with the compound, we were really looking at a maximal and near maximal resistances to condition him. Deng Chai could effectively reach 696 points in his peak of performance, and decent resilience over the 692, which is still far away from the top level of the world, but it is another class. It's a growth of 50 points from the medium athlete, the medium low athlete that he used to be. So the job can be done in compound, but the perspectives of development in that sport, they are big. There is a lot of work yet to be done, a lot of observations to be made.
Is the strength and conditioning for recurve archery very much different from a compound?
That's pretty much what we are saying. That depends also by the skills that we are considering, though, because there are still postural skills and proprioceptive skills, means body awareness, that are common tasks to both styles.
Yeah.
And then there are though the forces engaged and the force mapping that changes quite sensitively between the two. Yeah. Which makes very different the job of the strength and conditioning to address these matters.
Yeah. I wanted to move on to talk about Korean team. Obviously they have a reputation for being so dominant, not just at one Olympics but consistently at every 4 years and other world archery competitions. In your view, why do you feel they are such a strong team and consistently strong? They're always on the podium at some competition or other. Other countries, they might get a chance every 1 in 4 Olympics or something like that, but Korea seem to be there, all the time, and they have a very strong presence.
Well, the Korean national governing body has a very peculiar philosophy around the discipline. First of all, Korea, is to be said that the Korean Olympic team, the Korean Olympic Committee, let's call it, has made the choice in the faraway 1970s to direct all their attentions and budgeting to the smallest sample of these Olympic disciplines, where they assessed physiologically and biomechanically that they could be competitive. Therefore, the majority of investments have been addressed into archery, into short track, into pistol shooting, into rifle shooting, into athletics, hurdles, and a few other disciplines. So basically, we're talking about a nation that, in the widest array of sports that you have involved in the Summer Olympics, they effectively prepare 7 or 8 sports. All right, so that makes the job very different. Makes also the budget pot being very different, and that allows you over the 40 years, 50 years now that have been passed into this system to have refined a system which basically relies on professionalism into those sports. When it comes to archery specifically, the athletes practicing, let's say it differently, people practicing archery in Korea are on the order of hundreds of thousands, mostly young. But the athletes, the ones that really gets into the national governing body and start practicing the sport from the high schools are pretty much a few thousands. That tells us basically that the structure of a pyramid in Korea makes them being prepared to the top level and being cleared and refined by skills and by scores since the very early stages of their development.
They have a much larger pool of people to work with from the beginning, right?
At the beginning, yeah, and they can specialize them earlier. This is what makes a difference. So what we're saying is that when an athlete who has started practicing at 9 years old has arrived at 15 years old, 16 years old at the high school, on the verge of going towards the higher education, with already 6 years of practice, and 6 years of practice with lots of volumes, because their philosophy and their culture is a culture pretty much imprinted on volumes and volumetric approach to the sport. The more you repeat it, the more you train into it, and the better you will become.
Right.
At that point, you find yourself already specialized, an athlete, over-specialized into that discipline at 15 and 16 years old, which we are not saying is a good thing. We are saying it is their feature.
Their what, sorry?
Meaning that once from, it is their feature.
Their feature, right, okay, got you.
One characteristic of theirs.
Yeah.
So meaning is when they move between 15 years old and 17, 18, 19 years old, they have already either 4 years of top level training at that point, either a university level or a national squad level, and they arrive at 21 years old at top level or world level.
Whereas some of the 21-year-olds that we have, or other countries, they're still some way behind that, right?
They might be even very well learning at our stage at 21, because many of the athletes that we count on, they learn their first steps in archery a university level or at school. And for a human brain, developing those skills, developing the sensitiveness of feeling and coordination to employ into our sport, starting at 19 years old, it is very different from an athlete who starts developing those feelings, who starts shaping his brain and these motor centers around the discipline at 9 years old.
Yeah. What do you think I wanted to talk about coaching cultures. You've been to a number of different countries and coached with many different teams. What effect does the different coaching culture have? So, for example, in Korea, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume their coaching culture is very much the coach says something, the archers will listen, not necessarily ask or have their own ideas. They will just go away and do it, and come back and they'll do something else. And they kind of, to some level, just a lot more obedient, I guess. Whereas in the West, maybe we tend to have our own opinions. Some people will say, well, I've been doing it this way for 5 years and it works for me. Can I not continue this way? Whereas, the coach is there, they know what they're doing, and they should be listened to. Is that also something to do with why maybe Koreans or those in the Far East are a little bit more dominant?
So you mean, I'm sorry, what is the focus of the question? Whether the difference in approach of the athletes towards coaching makes the difference in performance?
Yes, I guess, yeah. The attitude of how the athletes see the coaches and how well they listen to them.
I can tell you, I can assure you that there are attitudes, particular attitudes, and a bit reactive attitudes towards the coaching styles, also in Southeast Asia.
Sure.
And that was one of my first unexpected surprise when I was approaching the first big challenge of being head coach of Thailand. So effectively, they are Southeast Asians. They are extremely hard workers, very outstanding quality. But the last thing you would expect is, even if they keep shooting from 9 a.m. in the morning to 5 p.m. in the afternoon, is that they wouldn't be following with pleasure, gladly, what you ask them to do sometimes.
Right.
And that's the same for the Koreans. So I believe that is not exactly that
Okay.
a reason to hide behind for a different standard and results. It is the system, the real system where we talked about so far that explains many points of that difference in performance standard. And it is also the base level of the athletes, because even if in Korea you have half of your athletes at 16, between 16 and 20 years old, who are having kind of an attitude, and they do not progress in the best of their direction. There is the other 50% that is already top level and that follows. So yet they are securing the other 50% being performing. And when I'm talking about 50% in there, we're talking about 7,500 people, because the Korean national governing body, at least until a few years ago, the estimated numbers were the real governing body, the top governing body, was 15,000 members. So not many at all. But the standards of those 15,000 are the highest. So even if you have 7,500 of those athletes who don't deliver, who do not cope with the requests and demands of the Olympic body, there are another 7,500 who can respond to those requisites.
Yeah. So very much that their structure was top down. You know, the governing body, they decided, like you said, 20, 30, 40 years ago, to focus on these particular sports and put a lot of effort into those sports. Is that maybe something that us in the West, or maybe more specifically in the UK, that we may be lacking?
No, I couldn't say really lacking, because, I mean, let me talk about my experience here in Great Britain, right? I arrived here in Great Britain in 2016, finding a system which was completely different to whatever I had seen so far, because the Italian system is a top-down system, Italia CONI. The Thailand system, Southeast Asian system, is absolutely pyramidal, as much as Korean is. In Great Britain, I found pretty much a different situation, where the national governing body is basically built up and governed on the people, with three stakeholders surrounding the national governing bodies. One main stakeholder, UK Sport, and the other two stakeholders, BOA, Team GB, and the local stakeholder, Sport England. Now, in all of this, what it came to my eyes is that the attention of this system is not exclusively focused on the athlete, on the outcome, on the results, on the success, but it is focused on the athlete. It is focused on services, on providing services to the community. I cannot say that we lack of something, since we have more attention towards the community and towards the social impact of sport. I can say it is an enormous potential. Certainly needs careful development, because it takes an easy step without having clear in mind what variants are in play when you have a system like ours. It takes a few steps away from losing control of performance and losing years and years, generations of formation of a national governing body that find itself in the difficult task then of delivering or restructuring, refurbishing their structure in order to bring back success, as it was for ArcheryGB a few years ago. So again, the top-down structure lack, is that what prevents us from winning? No. I believe that our structure, based on people and based on social impacts, it is potentially very rich. It is it requires though very careful management, because many variants are in play that may lead you very far away from the standard of performance required at international level.
How was the reaction to, for example, when you were coaching in Thailand, how did they take to, you know, a foreigner or a Westerner coming to teach them? Was there any cultural issues there or not?
Yes, there were, as I believe that there are always, I must say. I mean, my old mentor used to tell me when I chose then to follow up my Olympic career with the professionalism as member of staff, that wherever you go, you will first need to learn and understand how they think before expecting them to learn and understand how you think about them.
Right.
And that is I think one of the best lessons that I ever received.
Mm-hmm.
Yet doesn't mean that I could do it good, because the first attempt, effectively, consciously, what the first thing that you want to do is arriving there and leaving your print, starting structuring the work as you see it. And obviously that is different from their culture, because their culture is a culture of enjoying the day, first of all, the Thailand background, a culture inspired to Buddhist culture, to Buddhist dogmas. So they are pretty much enjoying the life. They are pretty much enjoying the essence of what they do. So that is very complicated for them, arriving in contact with an Italian ex-Olympic standard who is goal-oriented, task-oriented, and it judges the works, the extent of the works that we are doing by the outcome. So it was a huge difference in point of view at the beginning. With the support of the staff, the support of the presidency at the time, and time by time, knowing better each other, me knowing more them trying to understand more what I meant, what my personality meant, we arrived to a good standard. At the end of the day, we qualified for Rio.
Excellent. And how many years were you there for?
I worked in Thailand for a very short stint, unfortunately. It was pretty much 9 months, one season. 6 months for 6 months I was residing in Thailand. And then I kept going. When I relocated over here in Europe, I kept going, just providing them consultancies and support until I qualified to the Olympics in the final quarter tournament in Antalya.
Just moving back again to what you're talking about with archery in Korea, and they start from very young age. How important is it, do you think, that archery should be in schools from, say, a primary age level through to secondary?
Very, very important. But rather than archery itself, I know that for all archery coaches, it would be possibly a priority that the young lads, the young boys and young girls would start the sport very early. I want to differentiate myself from that point of view. It's not just about archery. It is about multiple motor experiences, multiple movement experiences. So yes, it would be an extreme advantage if these young lads and these young boys and girls would be able to fire some arrows, to shoot some arrows at their primary school, at their secondary school, so earlier at 9, at 10, at 12 years old. But it would be outstanding if they could not just do that, but they could practice as well those practices, those archery practices, together with javelin as example, together with gymnastics as example, together with athletics as example, shot put, hammer throw, whatever gives them the widest array of experiences that makes their body functionally prepared to sport and their mind prepared in body awareness in order to pursue a career in sport or whatever level they want to pursue in sport.
Yeah. So just giving them basic exposure to motor skills, coordination, balance, things like this. You think this would make them a more comprehensive athlete?
Absolutely, yes. Makes a more comprehensive athlete, a wider potential of development in any sport, which is a definite advantage also for us in archery, because coordination, it is one of the key commanding skills of our sport. Yeah.
Looking into a training session, it's been said that we should. I can't remember the saying, but you treat the training session like it's a competition, so that when you come to competition, you think of it as a training session. So you should be relaxed and things like that. Is this kind of your approach, or do you have a different approach to training sessions?
It is kind of my approach, but the means through which I create this environment are probably different from what we may think as the normal means of creating a competition training environment. Let me explain that. So basically, as I was saying in the seminars that I held in the past 2 weeks, it is more creating all the possible situations of difficult and stressed situations in performance during the training sessions that help you approaching later on the competition in the same kind of mental approach, or perhaps even an easier mental approach and physical approach at that point in time in performance, in competition. That's simply by educating the body to overcome very difficult tasks, and more than very difficult, modulated, progressive tasks, starting from easy, going to very difficult in development across time, but educating mostly the body to change consistently between those challenges and rebuilding back what the ideal conditions of performance are in the shortest amount of time possible. Once in training session, I educate myself in changing task 10, 15, 20 times and performing those 200, 250 shots, which I advise to be a decent training session. At that point in time, when I am shooting my 72 shots of scoring or my 120 shots of scoring in one entire day of qualification rounding workout, plus a few matches in the afternoon, I certainly have an approach to shooting those arrows, which is much more lighthearted than what it would be just chasing scores or shooting scores, performing after scores, every training session of my life.
So if I've understood it correctly, at the training session, you're training to a higher standard where you have more things going on, so that at the competition, you only have less things to focus on.
Absolutely, yes. I do train in different standards, in various standards. And those standards are the factors affecting performance, the factors conditioning performance. So, like all Olympic planners would do, listing the factors and dividing your attention, addressing your attention towards those factors in structuring the training plans make the athletes coping with all of those stressors, gaining advantage in preparation from all those exercises, which are affecting directly skills of performance.
Yeah. When you are, and this is, as I'm trying to develop my coaching skills and things like that, let's say you have a new archer, they come to you, I don't know, they're on a county squad somewhere, and you have to coach them. What would be the first 3 areas that you would look at a new archer shooting?
Well,
I know it's quite an open-ended question, but all right, you let them shoot, 5 or 6 ends, see how they shoot. What would be the main areas that you would look at to help you guide your way and figure out, right, how do I address certain issues that they might have?
Well, mostly, first of all, I do not list many issues. I keep observing them for quite a while. So even more than 6 ends, even just an entire training session, or more than one training session if I can. That depends by the time available that I have. Then, as I advised into the seminars, the first thing that I go after is balance. How does the body look like when it is engaged into shooting a bow?
Yeah.
Opening a bow.
I think you were talking about the X and Y axis, yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the body in space. So first of all, the static measures, the balance, from all 3 angles that I suggested, effectively at least 4, because it's front, behind, back, from the string side and up. Second, the dynamic, how they behave, how they move into the bow, how they move when the shot is gone, when the arrow is gone, how they move after the arrow is gone, which tell me a lot of things. It tell me what effort they do in shooting their arrow. It tells me if there is one half of the body which overworks as opposed to the other. It tells me also if the balance is affected by the forces or vice versa, because it tells me that if an athlete is, after releasing, he is leaning on one side or on the other side, evidently there is a reaction. Mm-hmm. So all those point of observations are basically around static measures and dynamics. And from that, I do kind of a profile of an athlete, mm-hmm. and then talking to them after that, asking a few questions, trying to understand what they picture in their mind, their sequence, their process of shooting. It is what I need to hear. I need to see what they see.
Right. Interesting, yeah. I remember one thing you said in one of the webinars, archery is about shooting, I think it was something like shooting a bad shot, but making sure it goes to the 10, something like that.
Absolutely, yes. It is about delivering the mistakes in the gold rather than shooting the perfect shots in the 10, because the perfect shots, by definition, by saying perfect, effectively I am delivering already a good shot. But when I am handling my imperfections and how I am handling my imperfections makes me securing to keep up with the level of performance and raises my level of performance indeed.
So, you know, if we're able to manage our imperfections and still deliver a good shot, that automatically means our standard is higher, right?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. So when I keep all my mistakes, you imagine an athlete who keeps all his mistakes, say, calling them mistakes, in the gold, and you see what the ratio scores are. To check this information, it is easy to be proved. Just check on the score sheets of the Olympic standards or World Cup. They are available on World Archery. You see how many of the top level athletes, top 8, they really reach all 72 shots in the gold. Very few. A couple of shots usually are in the red, at least. But yet, all the worst mistakes, yet they fall inside the golden circle. Which makes the overall score, even when you shoot a bad shot end like a 52 or a 54, the overall score, it makes still the top level standard of 680 and more.
Yeah. Many people say, I think not just in archery, but in many other sports, you know, it's 90, they say 10% physical, 90% mental. At what point, or rather, you know, when archers are at full draw, what do you advise them to kind of think about or focus on or not think about? Because it's at that point, I think, where many people, you know, either have target panic or they start creeping or their mind starts talking to them and they're hearing voices and so many things. What's your advice on how to control this couple of seconds?
Honestly, focusing on the real essence of the sport, which is not about thinking, it's about shooting an arrow. Once you are focused on shooting an arrow, you're not thinking when you are at anchor, and this is the point. Let's look also at what the average timing standard is for a top level athlete. You will never see an athlete who spends more than 2-3 seconds at anchor before shooting an arrow. Right. And if you see them, they are very top level performance, but many times they are also subject to sudden drops, quite heavy. That's to say that there is no real time. If someone has the correct process installed into his mind about what a shot must look like and what a shot must be, and how to maximize this shot, there is no real time to think. But there is no real priority of thinking to anything, because your focus is not about when you are at anchor of thinking. It's about after, when the bow is spinning. So this is the first point of observation that I would advise everyone to focus on. About who says that this sport is 10% physics, 10% body, and 90% mind, what can I say? I do not want to show any lack of respect. I respect this opinion. I also see that historically, in sport, like in everything, what human people do, they attribute a lot of weight to ethereal things when they do not understand what they're dealing with. So if I do not know how to put my arrows in the goal, I guess what I'm saying is that very likely I will try to pin it on the mental and transcendental aspects that I know that I cannot control, I cannot quantify, so I am justifying myself. I believe it is far wider than 10% on the body. It is much bigger than 10% on the body. And I believe also that there is a respectable share of at least, I would say probably a 50% of mental skills and mental tasks to be performed into the shot. But that depends by the individual. That depends by the individual, because there will always be one individual who has a shot relying on the 50% on his mind, someone else who does not need any more than the 30% of his active conscious mind active into his shot, into his practice, in order to deliver a reliable shot.
I was speaking to Kieran yesterday, and I also posed a question about, you know, the dominance of the Koreans. He was saying they just have you know, a vast number of high quantity of arrows that they're always shooting every day, and you know, over time, I guess the more time on the range, the more muscle memory you develop, and obviously assuming it's correct muscle memory and not bad muscle memory. Does this then create more of a subconscious print in the mind, so that when you do come to your shot execution, you don't have to think about it as much? It's already there because of just repetition.
It is correct. The wider number of repetitions and the higher volumes, they are justified by the idea of learning the most we can, subconsciously, unconsciously, the movement pattern that we are repeating. I believe that we have imported this from the Southeast Asians and from the Korean philosophy and the Oriental philosophy that have spread archery towards us. I am a believer that a consistent number of shots, quite a big number of shots must be done, but that depends also by the individual. So it must be clear that big volumes that we are talking about, they are individually different depending on how each single person perceives the load. And what we're talking about here is internal load versus external load. So I cannot say, that meaning that I cannot say to an archer or to an athlete that he must be performing at least 300 or 400 shots or 500 shots per day on another body. So our professionalism, it is also about quantifying what is the limits, what the thresholds are to be hit for each single athlete in order to stay into a training area, into an efficient area in training session.
Is the question of quantity and quality, you know, is it generally better to shoot lower quantity arrows but good quality ones, rather than, you know, many arrows and the quality not be so good?
And they are all true. They are both statements. They are perfectly true. Just it is demonstration of how young, despite being one of the oldest sports that there are, archery, talking about archery, these statements are a demonstration of how young our sport is in terms of Olympic preparation, in terms of professionalism. Because you cannot say that it is best for an athlete to do less shots more accurate, as you cannot say that it is best for an athlete to do many more shots but less accurately. There is a time for everything, and someone who must plan in an appropriate and professional way a season must account for periods in time where the priority is going to be building up volumes of shots, losing or leaving aside, let's say better, putting aside a decent amount of quality for the moment, to later on reducing the number of shots and building back up that quality, which will be, I can assure that, even stronger than what it used to be once you have been passing through an appropriate loading period.
Mm. How true is the statement? I'm sure you know it very well. You know, they say, you know, practice makes perfect, but practice makes permanent as well. Meaning, you know, even if you're doing bad practice, then you create those bad habits.
Sorry, repeat the question, please.
So there's a well-known saying, you know, practice makes perfect. You do something over again and again and again, it becomes perfect. But if you're practicing it in the wrong way, they say practice makes permanent. So if you're doing something wrong, then you will practice it in the wrong way. It'll permanently become like that. How true is that statement, do you think?
It is very true, and yet it doesn't mean that we cannot do anything about it. Meaning is that, okay, if I practice in the wrong way, most likely, effectively, my brain is learning something, some input, some neural input, which is not accurate. So probably the more I practice it, absolutely, the more I practice it, and the hardest is going to be for the human body to be re-educated to some different pattern. If we are talking, as example, to a wrong technique learned. What we have been demonstrating effectively through those seminars, I believe that we have been demonstrating that there are many means of conditioning the human body. And among these means, there are the chances effectively to re-educate the body in a faster way than what it is just a mere practice in itself. So by using tools, by enhancing the learning activities that an athlete is exposed to, you can correct bad habits up to some extent. But obviously, even there, it is going to be probably an individual setup that makes the difference. Right. So someone maybe even after years and years of bad habits may be re-educated to some different pattern. Someone else may try to. Think on an Olympian. Think on an Olympian, as you have seen, there are Olympians with different motions and different patterns, which may be even looking awkward, maybe even looking not efficient, but yet they deliver professional standard at top level. You wouldn't correct those patterns since they are securing their performance and they have built up their performance standard on that.
I mean, your Italian colleague is an example of that. You know, his technique was very different, but he delivered the shot.
Absolutely, some top level like Michele, the way that someone like some top level like Michele shoots an arrow, shoots a bow. You wouldn't change that. You do not know what you are going to find after that, and it's going to take likely years and years before we arrive to the same standard.
Interesting. I'm sensitive. I'm sensitive of. Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know how fast about this.
Yeah. I was just saying that I'm sensitive of the time. I know you're a busy guy. I don't want to keep you too long. Just one last question, Alberto. In terms of strength and conditioning, archery is not necessarily a cardiovascular based sport. As far as I can see, you don't never really get out of breath or anything. But how physically fit does an archer need to be? Because you know, at many of these competitions, we see archers of many shapes and sizes. Some of them don't necessarily look, you know, like an athlete. Some of them have a pot belly or whatever, but they still shoot very well. So how fit and healthy does an archer need to be in your view?
To keep it simple, fit for purpose.
Fit for purpose, yeah.
But to make it, to give you a responsible answer, the best of fitness we are at and the best we can do. But this is already, first of all, for our own survival and our own well-being. Yeah. Then above it, you imagine the tasks of a coach who does the job as we do, as I do, and any other Olympic plan in a various context of sports,
Yeah.
it is the lesser fit an athlete is, and the hardest it is for us to condition them.
Mm.
You see what I mean? So the basic fitness, it is proportional to the expectations and to the perspective that an athlete has. I do believe that I will never have any, there is no real reason for having any preconcept about what an athlete in archery must look like.
Mm.
I do not believe in stereotypes, but yet I believe in limitations that can occur due to an overweight status, as example, a permanent obesity when it comes to the chance of conditioning a body to the best outcome possible at Olympic level.
Yeah.
It reduces a lot my range of actions.
Mm. Many beginners, many people think with archery it's about strength and how heavy you can pull a bow. But if we look at some of the leading nations, their women's team, for example, sometimes dominate the men's team. And again, if we go back to Korea, the Korean women are between 5.5 foot. They're very small framed, slim frame, but yet they're able to shoot 70 yards very accurately, and they're shooting good poundages. Is that proof that technique always trumps physical strength?
No, not always, and that depends again by the individual features. There will always be more efficient techniques who do not need, or at least the most efficient the technique, and probably the lesser expense it has in terms of energy. Therefore, the more force I can maximize. So to make it simple, I will not be using the same amount of effort. I will not be engaged into the same effort if I have a very efficient technique as opposed to someone else who has a less efficient technique.
I see.
But it is a sport where force has a role. It is a factor of performance. And it's been demonstrated at this point in time, at least by one academic review paper, Spratford and Campbell, 2017, finally enlisting the factors affecting performance. They have highlighted the draw force and the bow arm force as being factors that can affect performance. So we are not saying that it is a strength-based sport, because it is not a factor that affect performance for the majority of the outcome, but it is certainly a factor that has an importance into the game, into the skills involved.
Yeah. With all your time at ArcheryGB, coaching, things like that, do you have any time to yourself to do any shooting, or do you still shoot nowadays, or is that finished now?
Unfortunately, perhaps I could put together 20 to 40 shots a week, but even when I say it, I don't believe it, because at the end of the day, I do perhaps 40 or 60 a month.
Okay. Well, look, as long as they're good quality shots, you're still on the path.
And this is the sad part, mate, that when you are doing 60 shots in a month, there is no quality at all. There is quality for 20 shots, then there is another quality for the following 20, and there is a damn bad quality at the last 20. So it's not about that.
Excellent. Alberto, thank you for your time. I appreciate your time. It's been very, very interesting to speak to you. I've really benefited from the recent webinars. Are there any more planned this year or in the next couple of months with yourself?
And provide, because we have seen that there's been demand for a follow-up session, and perhaps even to something more. That though depends by the commitments of the Olympic squad. So yeah, probably there will be something at some point. We don't know yet.
Okay, excellent. Well, the last two were very, very beneficial. I'll have to go over and listen to them again. But once again, thanks for your time, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you for your time and thank you for inviting me.
No worries, no worries. Thank you very much, Alberto. Take care.
Bye. Have a good